Please rise and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome. This is the March 14 regular meeting, monthly meeting of the Incorporated Village of Sag Harbor Board of Trustees. I welcome you. I congratulate you working your way through this little northeaster that's out there and joining us tonight. I will call the meeting to order. First three items are approval of minutes from the regular meeting of February 14, 23. The minutes from the grievance day held as part of the tax process on February 21, and a motion, also in the motion for the budget meeting held on February 22nd. So we'll hear a motion to approve the minutes of those three events. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Tom, is there a second?
Second.
Ed, thank you. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm aye for 2 out of 3 because I was not in attendance.
So you were,
You were
I was-
not for grievance.
I was not here for grievance. Sorry, I was in attendance for budget.
okay.
Okay,
Well, you can grieve tonight.
I am grieving.
Feel free to grieve at any moment. All right, thank you. For my report tonight, first, again, thank you for weathering the weather. Appreciate everybody being here. A week from now, we will have the next step in the budget process on Wednesday,
Tomorrow.
tomorrow. Sometimes there's a week in between. In any event, and it's at 4 o'clock tomorrow
Correct.
here. And we will be in the hands of our treasurer and clerk. And we're getting closer to the actual proposal. Want to give you a quick report on Steinbeck Park. It is not true that we're recreating the Sahara Desert. All of the soils that have been donated from a number of different sources to complete the topographical work that I believe is described in the original proposal as a rolling lawn and fills in the space around. We still use the word amphitheater, which is too big for what we're doing, but we don't have a corresponding smaller word for that. So that's what you see. The neat piles, even in this weather, have begun to be rearranged. And I'd say in another day or so, you'll be able to see what the configuration is of adjusting. There's a slope there and there's a dune above the beach. And for those who remember, and we still have them down below if you want them, the original plan from which we are working was a package put together by our friend and pro bono landscape architect of international reputation, Ed Hollander, is also a resident of this village. So if you want to catch up on any of that, we have the plans from which we've been working and adapting literally for the last 4 years. But that's the work you see going on there. The hope, and there was a pretty decent report about it this week in the paper, the hope is to have that phase of the work in shape to have the property reopened in its new configuration by Memorial Day. Now, these last couple of weeks haven't helped us on this kickoff on this end of the phase, but when the soils work and the topographical work is finished, the plan is to deal with seeding, sodding, the installation of additional irrigation. We have sprinklers on the western third of the property, and we will be adding sprinklers from there all the way to the corner down by the circle. And so we'll have a full irrigation system You may notice there's a box up along the roadway. All of the infrastructure to support the sprinkler system is there, and part of the next phase of work, when all the bulldozing stuff stops, will be to lay the sprinkler hoses under soil. So that's pretty much the report on that. And everybody here with influence would provide for 2 solid weeks of good weather would be the single best contribution anybody could make right now. The treasurer's report, our treasurer, Tim Bullock, up to his neck in budget making.
Good evening, board. As of January 31st, the revenues were at 12.4 million. We closed out the annuals for our dock fees in January, so that brought our revenues up. And then the remaining, it's over the prior year, up to 35,000 for docks. To date, we're up 385,000 for dockage. We also received funds from our fire and ambulance contract service fees from one of our outlying districts. We're still waiting for other funds from 2 towns for that contract. The village received donations in January of excess of 200,000, mostly for the fire vote and other donations for the police department as well. Interest earnings through January are over 63,000. Mostly that's going to be used for funding of our reserves. The expenditures were at 60% of our budget at 10 million compared to the prior year. We're at 9.2 million. In January, we had some expenditures related to the sidewalk repairs for the village of 95,000 throughout. And then we also have sewer upgrades to the control panel for 9,000 and actuator for 10,000. That's my report.
All right. In terms of documents and information about the developing budget, we have copies of materials thus far. But when what is beginning to go on now is meetings, departmental meetings within our departments and with the treasurer and the clerk. So as what emerges in the coming weeks will be all reduced to an actual proposal. So for input, we don't have a formal process outside the meetings, but it's small enough. If anybody has a particular point of view on any budget element, feel free to just ring me up or come by. But the process is underway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I will give the departmental reports for a couple of our departments, starting with the building department. I find that I often go right to the revenue side of these things because I've become very revenue conscious in this job. To date, we have seen a total of $70,467 in revenues associated with the permitting process that's performed by the building department. And while this is a very good number, we are experiencing some of the compacting of that activity that goes with the tail end of COVID and perhaps a slowing down here and there. But the number for February, which is a 28-day month, was just under $28,000, a considerable reduction below the year before, but still a very positive number. The code enforcement and fire marshal activity, all of the numbers are in the report, and that continues in good weather and bad. The reports are available. We've had further reservations for dock and moorings for the summer as we go forward. So as we look at this season thus far over 2022, we are running about $150,000 ahead of last year. We have solid lists of people waiting for slips, moorings, all of those good things. And the bookings on the transient dock are very high. So the waterfront looks very strong going into the spring. Two things to observe is that the work on the transient dock is going forward and hopefully completed well in hand. And tonight, in a few minutes, you'll have a chance. We will be authorizing the first funds for the new harbor master boat. Bob has led the effort to take proposals there, and we'll be not sending the old one to the Smithsonian, but it's been around long enough to have earned that. So that is underway. We brought the harbor master's boat, as ancient as it is back in service for the season with this slight interruption these last couple of days. So you will continue to see that that old timer around until the new boat arrives. In Public Works, the tar crack sealing of various village streets continued up until this weather segment. Street sign replacement is going on, as it does in the early spring every year. PSEG has finished laying down the electrical lines. Their next portion of this job is the repaving of the trench lines that you see on the street. I'd say that job went well. We had no major incidents associated with the work, and the company managed to keep us well informed, and I would say it was a pretty good project all the way around. There is some patching that's still going on, and probably a little more that'll arise here from the next couple of days. The cleaning of rain gardens has begun. This takes a little bit of a delicate hand, but as we add rain gardens, this is the time of year where the beds need to be cleaned out, and that is underway. The street sweepers are out and working. For the information of all, the Main Street is set to be milled and paved in the next 30 to 45 days. This will be painful for 3 to 5 days. They will mill the streets, then pave, then paint, then restripe. The question I've gotten is, why now? Well, at the end of the winter is the time to do this work. Before spring really kicks in. Dee is on the job with this. We're sensitive to the impacts on Main Street, but with a good break on the weather, and his projection is that the worst of it will be in a 3 to 5 day period in total. And that's beginning as soon as the weather allows. I think that's the committee reports from me. I would now turn to Mr. Gardella for the police department, fire department, and ambulance corps, public safety report.
Thank you, Mayor LaRocca.
Thank you.
Before I get to the numbers on our police department, I would like to make honorable mention of Pablo Londano, who was awarded Police Officer of the Year for 2022, specifically for his actions on April 22nd, 2022, when he revived a 40-year-old female who was in cardiac arrest due to an overdose. So he was honored at the Kiwanis Club this past March 10th. I would just like to make mention of that. Also, the ladies' locker room that we started is basically complete. I think we have the flooring needs to be done in the part that we expanded into, but that project seems to be winding down. As far as the numbers go with the police, the Sag Harbor Village Police Department had 589 calls for service in the month of February. We had 2 aggravated unlicensed operations, 4 suspended registrations. There were 5 motor vehicle accidents in the month of February. We had 6 arrests and 38 uniform traffic tickets were issued, as well as 83 parking summonses for the month of February. For the fire department, in the month of February 2023, the fire department volunteered for over 540 man-hours. During the month, the officers and members of the department responded to 42 calls for service. These calls included 1 motor vehicle accident, 1 helicopter landing, and 4 flooding conditions due to burst pipes. As we get prepared for the upcoming busy months, the fire department had a light month in February. During the month, we participated in President's Day Parade in Greenport. We also continued training with some house training with the help of our veteran members. Later on in the action items, you'll see that the fire department is requesting that 711, which was the old Phoenix engine that was housed down here on Main Street, which has now been taken out of service. We would like to make that an antique truck. The truck is 40 years old, so it's given us 40 years of excellent service. So I would ask you to consider that when it comes up,
And
please.
where would it go?
It's going to go at the fire department, from what I understand, museum, which is now located off of Scuttle Hole Road in Bridgeham. Is that correct, chief? Is that what they're planning on?
Is that the old?
Yes, the old,
Yep.
right.
Yeah, that big, the wedge. Yeah.
Yep.
So that concludes my report for the fire department. As far as the ambulance goes, we had 46 emergency calls in February. We had 4 work nights, 2 meetings, 5 training sessions, 2 work details, for a total of 935 man-hours, which is compared to 950 in 2023. We also sponsored a blood drive collecting 100 pints of much-needed blood. And those are my reports, Mayor.
Thank you, Tom. I would just make the observation, we are all in the habit of thinking of this the slow time of year, and it is, but these numbers are substantial, even in the deep winter month of February. 500 calls, to the police department. That's a lot of
Almost 600
activity.
calls.
600 calls.
600.
Yeah, so there's no such thing anymore as sort of downtime. or
The other thing,
quiet time.
the other thing, I spoke to Chief this afternoon. We're looking to get the outside plate readers that are on the outside of the vehicle. They're aging out. They're almost 10 years old. They're on cars that are subject to salt, water, air. What we're going to do is, what the chief's going to do is purchase cameras. We're getting the body cameras, so we're also going to have dash cameras in the vehicle, which also act as a plate reader. So we'll be able to record when the car stops, what's going on from the car.
And they'll be protected from the weather.
Right.
Inside.
We've also had 2 license plate readers activated that are now activated in the village. I'm not going to tell you where they are, but they're recording where the vehicles come in and where they leave. So if a crime is committed, or if we need to research something, we can access that data.
You can tell us.
I'm not telling you. I had a top secret security clearance, so.
I need to know.
Need to know basis.
Top
only.
secret crypto.
But those were paid for by the Suffolk County, by the way.
Right, well, that's nice. And that's your report. Thank you, Tom. Next up, Mr. Corish, the Sewer Department and Village Grants.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll start off with the sewer department with the regular report, February. Total gallons was 1.374 million gallons. We removed 20,000 gallons of sludge. The DMO reports were sent out on the 6th of March. Suffolk County DHS inspection. The next inspection is scheduled for April 3rd. New York State DEC showed up. They do that from time to time unexpectedly, and everything was good. We had no problems from the DEC. Right now, some of you may have noticed, we're working on a small extension to connect 4 homes on Rysam Street. That's privately funded. And it's going ahead because it overlays on our plans to sewer that district, which is area L. So we're learning a lot from this process. You'll see that there was a lot of water removal. They did not work today because of the storm, but they'll be back to finish off tomorrow. The first connection has been made. So they'll work their way up Rysam Street, maybe about 200 feet. Summary of operations: wastewater treatment plant running well under all permitted levels, and we're now just operating on 2 of the 5 basins. We had a power solution pro out, we have generator service, we got a great generator down there. It's of some vintage, diesel generator, it's in a beautifully heated room, it's a heated engine block. And it cranks up usually between 1 and 3 seconds to turn over, and that's a backup power for the plant should anything happen. We also have access to a mobile generator should that fail, as a double fail safe for the plant. Flow decrease from January to February was approximately 302,000 gallons, so town's getting a little quieter, though it doesn't show up in other statistics. But we'd expect that to turn around soon. Speaking of grants and the connection, we were not awarded the 2 grants that we went to the DC for area KML. In this cycle, we were hoping obviously to be successful. We were expecting these results in December. They were delayed for a long time. We just got the results this week. There were only 2 awards made in Suffolk County. Most of the rest of a lot of the awards are in the Hudson Valley for water quality issues into the Hudson River. When we applied for these grants last July, I think it was July 19th was the cutoff date. We did not have secret done, and we didn't have our local matches guaranteed at the time. So we knew that would not be helpful in our efforts. But since then, we now have secrets complete on these projects, and also we have our local matching funds in place. We will be meeting with the DNC in the next week to get a debrief of where we fell short, what we can do to improve our application so that we would have a better result next year. We went through a very similar process in the Havens Beach grant, where last year we were denied. We sat down with New York State. They told us where we fell short. We resubmitted and we were successful. So this is part of a process. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I think we're in a good place to keep moving this forward. And we're also looking at applying for grants for extended areas. So this is K&L, which is the Riceland Street area and the area to the behind the supermarket, around the parking lot, and bridge and Meadow and Rose Street. Those 2 areas are phase 1. We're also looking at phase 2, and we're also looking at stormwater runoff, so that if we do in the future start putting in plastic pipe, we'll also be considering stormwater, so we're not digging up the same roads twice. We're also looking at places when we're working on this is getting funds to put in what they call a dry pipe, I believe, which would be to put pipes in place that wouldn't be connected immediately, but the infrastructure will be there for the future. So that, again, we're not once the equipment's here and everything else is in place, we're trying to sort of project this out over, for 10 years at least, to make sure that the work we do is very efficient. And that concludes my reports, Mayor.
Just with regard to your mention of Riceland Street, in that big rain several days ago, that we see a lot of water accumulate on Bay Street when all the variables are in the right order or the wrong order, if you will, where in this case, a March moon, full moon, a northeast wind and a high tide, higher than usual tide, the water went all the way up to 23, Riceland Street. And we haven't seen that in many, many years.
That was on Saturday.
This past Saturday, with that big dump of rain, but the combination of the other factors. So that it could climb that far up the street under those conditions got my attention. So we thought we would mention it. Thank you, Aidan. Next up, Mr. Plum on planning.
Thank you, Mayor. We are working with the recently updated 2008 plans. John Shaka, the head of the planning board, is working with Ron Reed and a few other people and Trustee Hay to take those suggestions into consideration. There was out here. Is that on the website? I think it is. Is that on the website? The updated one?
I think we put we did put the summary. I don't think the whole 2008 is.
2008 is on the website.
It is on.
Yes.
The new one though, the revised one?
That's a summary.
The summary, you mean the Greenman-Peterson summary?
Yeah.
I don't believe that one is on.
But we can certainly post
Yeah,
it.
probably put it out there. So that's what we've been working on, is reacting to that. and trying to move forward with the planning suggestions that were contained therein. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That completes the departmental reports. I would hear a motion to accept. I'm sorry. Who's that young man
We're
sitting
good,
over
we're
there?
good.
You're good? Okay, sorry.
No. I do have a
My
report from the
apologies.
Justice Court
Um, You have an important report to make.
and the park. So
And the
from the
parks.
Justice Court, we have a new employee, Michelle Fields. She started a couple of months ago, a delightful, experienced woman who's, and I stayed out of her hair the first month or two to let her catch up. The flow through the Justice Court has gone down primarily in, frankly, parking tickets. We discussed a couple of months ago that the police chief said we have a lot of new TCOs. They're not writing as many tickets as before, but the revenue impact of that is somewhere between, if you project it through the end of this year, if this continues, last year we were down already to about $480,000 of revenues through the Justice Court. The prior 5 years, we were at about 600 to 680,000 at the peak. So anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 a year of revenues less coming through the Justice Court last year. And the first 2 months of this year, similar track for January and February. Again, it's the parking tickets that are down significantly. Vehicle traffic, other tickets are about the same pace they were in prior years. Relatively low, but same pace. So we need to plan for that in the budget cycle, less revenues. I'm not suggesting that the TCO need to write more tickets, but we do need to plan for the revenue hole that we're going to see in the budget.
And if you see the same shortfall you said in January, February,
We are seeing,
then we don't have paid parking underway during those months. So that was one thought I had, that maybe because we have paid parking, there were fewer tickets, but obviously if it's in January and February, it's not.
But the new calendar for paid parking is earlier.
It started, well, it'll start 3 or 4 weeks earlier, starts in May and run right through to Thanksgiving.
And that should have some bearing on.
That will help to raise that.
Yes.
revenue, we hope.
The other observation is we do have an action item for advertising for TCOs, launching the spring recruit for some young TCOs.
And on paid parking, I know we haven't discussed this yet, but sorry to interrupt.
no, go for it.
Because we've increased this season, I'm suggesting that we maintain the rates where they were last year. So we just, not that we're increasing the season and the rates, that we leave the rates the same. And then we'll get a good picture of this year. That's just it.
Doing better year to year.
Yeah.
No, well, thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's really it for the Justice Court. As I said before, the rest of the activity for Justice Court is pretty consistent year over year in terms of the other types of cases open and closed within the Justice Court. I'll move on to the park report. As many of you probably are aware, there's been a lot of conversations, discussions, negotiations between the park and the school for the past year, and most recently too with the town of Southampton about the capital improvements of the park that the school and the park have been planning together for more than a year now. Most recently, the town has floated an informal proposal to fund the capital improvements that the school was planning to fund. And the school recently at a board meeting endorsed that part of the town's proposal. I think there's still some disagreement over views of how Marsden should be dealt with. But in terms of the park, I'm hopeful. And I know that park representatives have met with the town officials, and we continue to meet with school officials about the work being planned on the park fields. I believe that title work's being done by the town now. And we're waiting for potential assessments for development rights for parts of the park. The park actually has 4 distinct parcels. 4 parcels comprise the park. 3 are contiguous, or relatively contiguous. Otter Pond's one. The parcel with the main fields is the largest parcel, and there's a triangle that borders Sag Harbor Bridgehampton Turnpike. And then there's a 4th parcel that's behind what used to be Sag Harbor Industries and Scavoni's plumbing house between Archibald and Joel Lane,
Joel Lane,
yes. So those are the 4 parcels that are being looked at by the town. I believe the park is not interested in giving up all of its development rights if the town is willing to go forward, but some portion of it. And the park is zoned R20, which is residential. So to the extent that there are development rights there, they would not be insignificant. The park's 40 to 60 acres. So those negotiations are in progress. Those appraisals are being performed now or being done soon. And we would expect that over the next month, the park leadership and town would continue discussions about potential CPF funding for the park. And that's the park report.
Well, thank you. I feel from time to time to remind when we do talk about the park, it serves so many municipal purposes. Many people assume it's the municipal government's property, but in fact, it's a trust created by Mrs. Sage back in the very early part of the 20th century, I think.
At the same time as the school and the library.
Right.
And so, and the nice thing about it is that in the founding documents for those 3, Mrs. Sage, Margaret Slocum, required all of them to work together. And so there's always been a collaboration between the park, the school, and the library. And it continues to this day. So, but the park is a not-for-profit, privately owned entity, frankly. The park board manages it. Funding has been challenging. Certainly capital funding has been challenging. So the fact that the CPF is interested is welcome to the park board.
And not everybody is aware that Otter Pond is part of the park property.
Yes.
That Mrs. Sage put all together back at that time.
So I have a question, Ed, are there development restrictions on the park, or is it just happens to be R20 because that was the zoning that was put in place?
There are development restrictions on the park, but it's funny, it's within the bylaws of the park that if the park is no longer used as a park, the land reverts to the Russell Sage. I don't know if it's a foundation or it reverts back. That's not really a development restriction per se. But that's one of the many issues that the town of Southampton is working through in their assessments and appraisals.
It would be welcome for the park to be funded and be able to do capital planning.
That is.
I think it's a great idea if we can work it out.
And it's already open to the public. I mean, there are no town residency requirements and no village residency requirements. Anybody can use the park as long as they're using it during daylight hours for the most part. And then the key issue, because the school does fund a lot of the ongoing maintenance of the park, it gets priority use for most of the fields. And so we schedule the park board schedules the park around the school schedule oftentimes, because a lot of the teams do use it.
One of the expressions of the closeness of the park to the village is that one trustee of this board, the elected trustees, sits on the park board, as I did when I first came on as trustee, and Ed is our official designee to the MASH board. And that bridge is very important, especially right now with so much going on.
It's true. That's also true of the library board too. One person from the library board always sits on the park board as well. That just, again, underscores, and that's a requirement in the bylaws of the park board, underscores the intent of her that those 3 institutions remained aligned.
Thank you, Ed. Now would hear a motion to approve all of the departmental, the treasurer's report, the mayor's report, and the departmental reports. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Okay.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
We now open a 15-minute public comment session to take questions or comments on the reports just made, not any other issues at this time. Are there any questions or comments to be made? Yes, John, come up.
Yes, please. Thank you. My name is Stephen. Thank you for all you do in diligence.
Why am I calling you John?
That's a good question.
My father's name.
My
So I
apologies.
take both.
That's an
What I'd like
alias.
to ask Benwood is what does the taxpayers pay for using the Hasselbeer Park per year?
Nothing.
Okay, where's the money coming from?
It's mostly privately, well, most of the ongoing operation expenses of the park come from Sag Harbor School District. They're the primary user and licensee of the park. The rest come from private donations for the most part.
So I can safely say that maybe 250,000 or 300,000 a year will serve all the high school, middle school, elementary school sports activities.
Not all, but most, yes.
I'd like to imply anyway, that most of, when I grew up in school and even today, is most of the classes that involve sports are not rejected. They don't say stay home. They don't say you can't play at the Hasselbeer Park. So my point being is, to spend all this money at the park, why are we adjusting to Marsden Street to create another park where maybe half that time won't be allotted to the schools, students, because there aren't enough students to use them? Now, can anyone answer that question?
Well, I would just say, to this point, the proposal that was made and has been now the subject of interface between the town, the school district, with some involvement with the village, but although indirect, because we don't have a formal role.
Actually, I'm not trying to address the village board here.
Right, so.
I'm speaking to Edward, actually.
Right, but Ed, if you wanted to jump in.
Sure, I think, is the question why? Could you restate the question,
My
please?
question is, in all these many years that all of you've lived or us being here, none of any school activities been postponed at the park because there always been ample space. So my question is, why does the school think they need a whole another interim of space where I feel half the time it's not going to be used?
I can say, well, most of the school's athletic activities in the spring and fall are conducted at the park. Not all are. The school has some of its teams playing in East Hampton, sometimes Bridgehampton, because of the lack of facilities or because of different makeup of the facilities, for example.
Well, I feel, and my time is almost up here, admittedly. I feel that because Bridgehampton is representative of Sag Harbor, we play girls basketball together, we do Little League together. And so there's really nobody out of the loop.
There are two. There's lacrosse and there's field hockey, which gets played in East Hampton to use their artificial turf, frankly, because that's what.
Exactly, because that's because of the playoffs when they use artificial turf, but they're not being abused by not playing. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm sorry
Now, can I just?
I'm not sorry to bring it up, but this is how I feel.
I'd just like to add, this is like the proverbial hot potato at the moment.
It is.
And so thank you for your input. I don't think we are in too much of a position to
No, you guys
take a
aren't,
stance, but I do appreciate your comment.
but I appreciate Edward's input with the park recreation.
It's a great asset for the entire community. It really is.
Another Steve.
Stephen, I just have a question regarding the TCOs. Do they have the authority to issue what was normally considered a moving violation?
They do not, correct? Tom?
Yeah,
They do
Okay,
not.
so that means if they observe someone who's making an illegal
They'll call-
U-turn on Main Street.
they'll call a police officer.
Okay, so this is the next question. It's my understanding, for example, that with these cameras, the Nassau County, I know, has them where they take a photograph of your license plate. So if someone passes a stop sign without stopping fully, the person is issued a summons from that traffic cam, but the summons is not for passing the red light, it's for some lesser crime. And of course, there's a fine associated with it. So it was just my thought, since we're having all of this new technology coming in with the cameras observing the streets 24/7, and there's 2 cameras. It might be advantageous if you were legally allowed to do it, to have those cameras directed, because that's a problem, you know,
The left-hand turns on Main Street?
yes. I mean, it's even bad now, I mean, and people do it all the time. So if we were able to observe and capture the license plate and send them a ticket by mail for some offense that's not considered a moving violation, or for something that's similar to what I just described. I just thought that would not only deter the illegal U-turns, but also perhaps enhance some of the revenue that seems to be sorely lacking.
I have a question. Would a cell phone video of an offense like that hold up in court?
No, you have to go based on, for a
Personal.
violation, you have to go based on the personal observations of the police
What about
officer.
the,
So you can actually ask him questions at trial, right?
right, what about if you have like if you get onto the LIE around exit 70, there's a camera there because people are always making that left turn. New York State has a maximum you can fine someone, there's no points, I think there's a $50 fine and no points.
I'd have to look into the.
That's not the
legislation.
maximum. Somebody's been caught by this a couple of times in different places.
Yeah.
It's not no points because there is no police officer
Right.
giving the ticket. But they can fine you.
They can fine.
And it's not a maximum of 50, I can tell you that.
So it acts essentially as a deterrent, and of course it produces some revenue, but I mean,
Yes.
look, in the middle of summer on Main Street, if I see it at least once a week during this time of year, I can just imagine what it's like.
I do know in some European towns, they have numerous cameras spread around, and some of them they're just the boxes with no cameras inside, but they have the desired effect of making sure that everybody just behaves.
Well, I mean, we already have the 2, so if they can read a
Well, he
license.
says we have the 2.
So, yeah,
The purpose of the cameras is to gather intelligence, information to, try to solve a crime. If a crime's been committed, or if we're doing an investigation, we're going to use the information that we collect from those cameras to try to close a loop. So they're not, as far as I know, I don't even know if the city does it anymore, but there's only certain areas where the cameras are used on traffic lights. I don't even think the city does it anymore. I'm
do.
not sure.
I'm telling
Maybe it's
you.
certain
Yeah,
areas.
They do.
I don't think it's prevalent throughout.
But it's again.
In
that's
areas
just
where
defined,
it's considered, where
There's no
it's
points, yeah.
used a great deal, I know you see the light, you actually see it.
This is an issue with code enforcement in general, by the way, too. When sidewalks and all that stuff, this becomes tricky because those people can't issue tickets either unless they observe it themselves. In other words, the code enforcement officers, they're in the same boat.
But I think to your point, Stephen, what you're talking about is a different type of camera than he was mentioning. It's a camera that actually does automate, take the pictures of the plates and everything, and then
Indeed.
it's-
And it's a close up, and even if, well, I mean, I would assume, I would hope that these cameras would have a similar capability. I mean, if a crime is committed at night, if you can't read the license plate, you sure as heck want to be able to. Anyway, it's just a thought, considering that seem to have the technology, it might be able to be put to a dual use.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Let me just observe, we do not have an active conversation or investigation going on that kind of traffic enforcement camera system in the village. There may be a time when it becomes a subject, but it is not now. To my understanding thus far, the installation of these systems requires a fairly substantial information system that it ties to the information that's gathered. And because it involves motor vehicles, it involves a tie-in to the DMV and the systems that are available to police enforcement in a village like ours. All of our officers in their cars can check out a plate number and all of that. But the system that would be required to back up ticketing by overhead cameras is not something we've examined or have any expectation at this point of examining. Peter,
Hi, I'd like to, Peter Ganang from Division Street, Sag Harbor. I want to go back, since this gentleman has raised the question of National Senior Park and the town and Marsden Street, just to raise something that you've heard about before from the Save Sag Harbor, which is the question of what's going to happen with the Marsden Street lot. A town meeting, which was extremely contentious about what's the plans are for Marsden Street. That the question of the park is very much tangled up with what's going to be done there. I wanted to. This board is aware that previous plans for developments on Marsden Street were rejected multiple times by the ARB as being inappropriate for that neighborhood. The plans that the school has put forth in Marsden Street are much more radical transformations of the neighborhood than even large houses would have been. So I'd like to ask whether this board will make some expression to the town and to the school saying that you'd like to have, we'd like as a village to have oversight about what happens in the development of that site, which is very much still on the table as far as I understand.
If I could address that first, I think in the first instance, I mean, the town and the school are still in discussions about both funding and use of that property. We don't really have any control over that. Our interest, our immediate interest, and there's something later on the agenda about that today, is making sure that whatever the town and the school come up with, and that's been shifting, as you know, addresses the stormwater work that's been done by the village before and upgrades that, frankly. Beyond that, I think it's incumbent on us to wait to see what's going on with the school and the school board and the town to some extent. And they haven't asked us to formally participate or play a role at this point.
I watched that whole meeting this afternoon, and it was contentious, it was very long. I think the town realized, and maybe the school do too, there's a lot of work to do right now. Nothing is happening immediately. They have secret to perform. They have maybe an EIS to do. So at this stage, I think it's fair to let the town work through this process. And we're very much monitoring I watched that from start to finish. I watched the last one. And monitoring what's going on and when it is appropriate for us to weigh in once we know what the parameters are. But at this stage, there's two very disparate camps as to how this is going to move forward. And I think we need some clarity on what the intentions are, and then we can form opinions that are appropriate and then make our.
Right, I've heard it said by some people that you know, if the school buys this property or the school and town together buy it, that as its school and Board of Education is involved, that they're not subject to village zoning and oversight. And as I've written, that's not, so far as I know, legally actually the case. So I just hope that, I'd just like to express the hope that you
Well, I
will
think
keep a close eye on this. And
Absolutely,
not sit by while things go on there that wouldn't have been approved by our ARB.
Sure.
And I can speak for everyone, but for me, I definitely would be, we should have an input, whether we can legally or not. It's a pretty tangled web of who can do what. It's being figured out now. In terms of that, I can't imagine if the school board came in and said they wanted to put a windmill on Long Wharf, would we really have to let them?
Right.
To me, there has to be some kind of legal, logical limit to that power. So, but that remains to be seen.
Thank you.
thank you, Peter. Yes, sir.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, I have kids pick up from practice, so I'm sorry if I'm leaving in the middle of your response. I just wanted to address the.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Oh, Sudhir Venkatesh, I'm a resident, 2 kids in the elementary school. A couple of clarifications. The original charter has been changed several times The Mass National Amusement Park does not have to be used as a park to serve. The meaning of that term, 1923, is very different than today. It has to be used for the community. So it can be used in a number of different ways to serve the recreational needs, however that's interpreted. Second, the foundation that owns it, manages the original steward, the Russell Sage Foundation, in the charter, they have several times undertaken requests to take rest control back from the park board. And as recent as 2003. So as you all move forward, I would urge you to make sure that that is something that we all take into consideration, because that's gonna, that could affect things down the line. Third, 70% of the funds come from the school, about 20% comes from a tennis program that's run in the park, and the rest comes from donations. You hope that it was the other way around. The thing that I just wanted to urge you to do is to ensure that those of us who are listening and don't have access are not confused and suffer from a lack of transparency. Already in the last 15 minutes, we've heard a mild contradiction. We are not involved, we are involved. They've asked us to appraise, we're undertaking some reviews, but we're not involved. That is very difficult for us to tolerate, and I'll tell you why. Because to this point, with Marston and Nash Park, every single entity has had a good reason not to include the public. The school, and I love the school, and I think they've done a fantastic job of keeping us in the loop, has been able to say we can't enter into a dialogue with the public at this point. We have to get a little bit further, and then it becomes too late to have the kinds of input. Thankfully, Jeff Nichols has just been wonderful and has taken that kind of input in the school board, but they've been kind of strapped by this process because the park is a private entity. We can't attend the park meetings, the board meetings. It's a public entity, even if it is a private non-for-profit. So it's very difficult for us to contact the park. It's difficult for us to ask, what are some of your strategic planning initiatives? And so if you're undertaking a process where you're going to start going down and doing appraisals and looking at easements, and especially with the CPF, which is a black hole for residents, once again, we are going to be told something about certain options, but not included in the process. So just for public trust, it would be great as early on as possible, even if you don't know, to include us in an open meeting, to let us know what some possibilities are. I'm happy to just give you my I'm a sociologist at Columbia. I'm happy to give you the polls that I've done of residents of looking at how people use the park. Yeah, well, we're happy to help you. The thing that we would really love is for us to not be told of decisions and options when it's a little bit too late to have. That's all.
I think, just for clarity, our involvement right now is looking at stormwater runoff in the area,
But he's referencing the park, though, not Marsden.
not Marston.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean,
And let me clarify, the village is not conducting appraisals. The town of Southampton is as part of the CPF review process. We are not involved in the appraisal process. We will not, the park board and the village board will not be given the appraisals. So there will be no transparency around that. The park board is a private entity. The park is open to the public. It is absolutely a private entity. That's a fact.
it is a fact with a public charter, with a charter to serve the public, which means you're.
It's a charter to serve the public, but is a privately run and owned entity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Try to, if I could, just from the seat that I occupy. Our involvement with the school board has always been limited because of the constitutional arrangement in New York that confers a fairly heavy dose of sovereignty on school districts. They are of different boundaries from their municipal neighbors and so forth, except in the cities where the city and the school district is coterminous. But even then, in New York City, up until 20 years ago, they were completely separate entities. So what we have here is a cooperative relationship with the school board, which is bigger than we are. Its geography is bigger than we are. And the most frequent contact in the day-to-day has to do with traffic and safety, parking, and very prosaic matters. And what has come up thus far in this conversation that's going on between the school board and the town has to do with the right-of-way associated with Division Street, which is in the hands of the village. It's a village street. And so we will look at and try to follow the conversations that go on and be attentive to whether any of that activity would impact us in terms of our responsibilities for public roads and so forth. So we do have a little tiny corner of the conversation, but it has to do with our traditional public works and highway function, which we've always done cooperatively with the school district. And that's what's been happening so far. We do have an item in here, which we'll explain when we get to it, that has to do with our examining the village-owned facilities that either abut or are integral to the GI, to the real estate that's being talked about. So what we'll be doing.
But again,
here is-
I'm sorry, but again, I think his questions are more directed to the park than the school, the relationship of the village and the park.
No, I do understand that, but the notion that's around that there's any kind of a lack of transparency in this conversation, I can just tell you, you've just heard everything that the
Right.
village is directly involved in,
Sorry.
and you're going to hear in a minute, an action that we're going to.
Yeah, let me preempt. It was a preemptive statement, not that you were being in any way not transparent. It's just that in my former life, I was at Facebook and Twitter. I lost half my friends at Facebook and the other one. And I ran the misinformation team. And one of the things you learn about the misinformation team is that it doesn't matter what the public thinks, they're gonna think what they think, right? You can tell them the truth 6 ways from Sunday, they're gonna think what they think. So my concern is that there's been a lot of loss of public trust, even though everyone is in their right place and doing their right thing. From the public standpoint, it becomes difficult when we feel disempowered. We don't know who to turn to because everyone tells us we can't do this, we can't do that. So where there are opportunities to be open, have forums, it would really behoove us because we're just struggling as citizens to get information and find answers. That's all I want to say.
Well understood, and thank you for very
Thank you very
thoughtful
much.
comments.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Douglas Newby, President of Safe Harbour. So I know this is obviously a bit of a stretch from the Mesh Park good comments, but having just spent many hours both in Southampton this afternoon and a couple of weeks ago at the town board, one of the things that's very clear is that there is a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding and complete breakdown in communication between the various groups. But it's very clear from the town board, I think, that they would be receptive to Radar Village engagement on the Marsden Street project, and look forward to whatever you're going to say later on today. The other thing, and I'm not an expert on some of the intricacies of these New York state laws, but my understanding is that in a historic district that the village actually has greater influence over the what the school does than it would typically outside of a historical district. I may be incorrect, but it would be good to look into that issue because I think one of the greatest concerns about that proposal is that it does just completely abrogate any of the village coding issues with coverage, lots and so on, parking, traffic, etc. So if there is an opportunity for the village to assert itself formally as well as engaging with the town, I think that would be really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie, I just have a quick question. Was wondering if there's any more money in the parking from the paid parking to do the sidewalks? And if that run from Mashemula to the school, those sidewalks, repairing those sidewalks have on your
Radar.
review?
There is a little money left, but we have it in a reserve in case there's not enough to attack that project. But we have another summer coming around and hopefully we'll have more revenue. And that's a conversation that we can certainly have with the school board, but I think it will be part of a much bigger conversation as to what's going to happen with the park. I learned everything I know about this watching today. It's not like we have any inside information. I watched from 1 o'clock to 5:30. There's been no other conversations going on. So as this develops, we have a real keen interest in this, and the village has, there are some very serious issues here that will have to be dealt with at the right time. But at this stage, I don't know how the meeting ended up, if this was, if they closed the public hearing or what was going on, but I'll find out later. But I know nothing more than anybody else would have gleaned from today's meeting. It is a good question, and it is something that would be considered in a holistic way.
It is the villages, the sidewalks.
Yes, yeah, is there
really-
like a
it's-
safe path to schools, or is
Yes.
there some
I think
development?
it's come up.
It's something we can definitely,
How much did we spend on sidewalks last year from parking?
we spent a total of, I think, $95,000 on sidewalks, up from a normal
I know, you did a
30,000.
great job.
And so there is a little bit of money that we need to, keep something
So
for
understand,
a rainy day.
Well,
Okay,
that
but
section.
yeah.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. That will bring the first of the public sessions to a close. Thank you for a lot of thoughtful comment, much appreciated. We'll now go to the public hearings that were opened at our last meeting. There are 3 in total, and I would hear a motion on local law, the first item number 1 under item 8. The local law amending Village Code, Chapter 215 to create rental registry permit requirement. Is there a motion to open that hearing?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
The hearing is open. Are there any,
We need to vote.
all those in favor of opening indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Is opposed, it is agreed to. Is there anyone who cares to be heard on this item?
I would also.
Yeah.
Right, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Go by alphabetical order. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was having trouble in school today. So I think the idea of this law is necessary. I think it's a great idea for us if we have residents in the village that have been rented out. They sort of, we need to make sure that they're safe. I have a problem with some of the aspects of this law, and it's specifically is chapter 11. This is, and I'll just read it so everybody knows what we're talking about here. It's not terribly long. Written certification from a licensed architect, licensed engineer, or licensed home inspector stating that the rental property complies with every provision of the code of the village of Sag Harbor, the laws and sanitary and housing regulations of the county of Suffolk, and the laws of the state of New York. The certification must also include specific statement that the rental property complies with all respects to the New York State Building Code. I don't know, having spoken to architects and engineers around town, I have found no architect, no engineer who is willing to go near this or certify this, that they're going to walk into somebody's house. I spoke to our building department, our building inspector and code enforcement, and nobody's been able to tell me or explain to me how I can walk into a home that's completely finished, it's built, could be 30 years old, and somehow inspected in a way that would be sufficient to comply with these requirements, that this home is in compliance with every aspect of the building code in the state of New York. And so from my point of view, I believe the responsibility should rest with the homeowner. And if the homeowner is conducting business, that we shouldn't be transferring some of the responsibility should something happen on that homeowner's neighbors. So that if the village, if something happens and the village has inspected the home and there is an incident and there's a lawsuit, is the village will have to pay, and the village will have to pay for the cost of that lawsuit, which eventually will come on the tax rolls of everybody in the village. So essentially, as a non-renter, you are subsidizing somebody who's not renting their home. You're being asked by the village under this, in my understanding of this, to subsidize the activities of a neighbor who is making a profit. I think the responsibility should rest with the homeowner. They should attest and have a notarized statement to the village that they have all of the required smoke detectors in every bedroom. They have all of the required carbon monoxide detectors on every floor, that they have all of the required pool safety requirements, self-closing gates, pool alarms, and alarms on pass-through. And I think that that is where this responsibility should lie, and not with the village and not with your neighbors.
Oh, I know, I completely agree with that. I think that it should be the homeowners, they should be self-certified. You know, this whole thing, I don't want, this horrible fire in Noyak, which was terrible for everybody, the first responders, the poor victims and everything else. It's understandable that we might want to do something about that, but the fact is that, like Aiden said, we would just be taking on more liability than we should, frankly, because even if an inspector walked through, if you could get them to walk through and the smoke detector fell off the wall and it wasn't there when there's a fire, the following day, you'd still be liable to some extent. And I'm saying, you know, I don't mean to be thoughtless about life and death. I'm not, but and furthermore, most homeowners insurance have a coverage, a rental amendment, so that if you are going to rent your house, you're supposed to tell your insurance company, and typically they add a little premiums, usually not much, but something. So that insurance company then becomes at least a party to all of this. And I just think that's where it should be. That's where the liability should be. And because we don't know about any other house, if you're not even renting your house. We can't walk around and guarantee that every house in this village is fire code and full safety compliant. It just doesn't happen. So anyway, I agree with Aiden.
Deputy Mayor Gardella.
Well, I thank you, Aiden, for pointing out number 11. I believe it's section B,
Yeah.
number 11. So on what that specifically says also is the Suffolk County codes, health codes, which are there's a lot more involved with that besides our local code. The intent, my intent, or where I'm coming from, is we want to make people aware, okay, that smoke alarms, means of egress, carbon monoxide detectors are critical, okay, to people, if you're renting your house, even if you're living there, right? So whatever accomplishes that in a simple form is what we should strive for, okay? The law that's written currently, I'm sure it was written, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, counsel, to put some teeth into this so that we have the flexibility and the power to enforce it. But I think that what's more important is that the people that are renting are aware that these things need to be in place and need to be updated. And whatever accomplishes that, I'm all for it. I've seen some samples where there's a self-attestment where you have to go through and you have to actually draw a map of where the detectors are located. I think something like that would be very applicable here.
I'm also given pause when we talk to all the professionals. We have so many great architects and engineers in this village, and they run a mile from this. It tells me that this is not something that the village ought to be stepping in and taking on. I just think the responsibility as the homeowner, this is all about safety. This is all about having smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and means of egress and swimming pool safety. And I just don't know how we enforce this. I don't know how this inspection takes place. And I would prefer to see it as a self-attestment that's notarized. And it's a statement to the village that you have upheld your responsibilities as part of this transaction.
Ed, did you want to be heard?
No, thanks.
I think that the trick,
Enough from you.
I think it's up to, we're going to rely on counsel here to bridge that gap, how we apply this legally to get people to come forward and say, fill out this self-attestment and say that these, that they're on the books, the house is being rented, and that they're aware that these things need to be installed.
And the rest of this, I think, is really great. There's only one other issue in here where we would send a notice to the, it says that a notice would be sent by certified mail to each owner and lessor, but it would be sent to their home address. But the very fact that they're renting a house in Sag Harbor would mean that they're not actually at home to receive it. So I think that needs to be looked at. That's notice of violation.
That's an editing.
That's just an editing thing, yeah. But that's the rest of this, I think.
Right.
It's going in the right direction. Everything about it
I
is
think the
good.
board also has to consider the effective date, because you're coming up on the season, so you're gonna have to think about when you want this to become effective.
Right. Well, based on this thus far this evening, I think we want to keep the public hearing open and hopefully hear from more citizens. I'd like to offer a thought or two. Around politics, it's often said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. I think this horrible tragedy has awakened an awful lot of people to what is the challenge of these rental activities that largely go unaddressed and unregulated. When you look at the town of Southampton where this tragedy took place, if you look at what's on the books, it sounds like a program, but it was so complex and not enforced in any meaningful way, apparently, that as we looked at that in other jurisdictions, one of the approaches we had was to try to take these other examples and bring them down to a manageable and enforceable device. And that's what that is. We do have a role now in safety that's enforced by our fire marshal and our code enforcement and so forth. So this is not a gross departure from that kind of activity. This is something village governments do. We are the, in the hierarchy of the state, the lowest level unit of government that has land use controls in our jurisdiction. So I think this is quite doable, but it's a work in progress. And some of what you've described here tonight as concerns, absolutely valid concerns, but might be addressed by, some of the language here is just overbroad. And so I think the next step for us is for all who have expressed specific concerns, let us have your notes. Let Liz have your notes.
Yep.
For the next week or two. And we'll continue the work and editing process to try to bring this down to something that is not going to, in my judgment, should not be 100% dependent on the owners, but not to let them off the hook either, but to have some device in our own toolkit that, just as we do now on other elements of what people do on their own property. So I think it's doable, it's achievable, but we're not there yet. So I would move that the public hearing remain open as we go forward, and we'll come back to this next month. I would say to our friends and neighbors, if you want to be heard on this, this is a good time to do it. So let us hear from you if you have specific concerns. And a lot of this is just practical good sense on avoiding what has happened. That's what we want to do.
You have somebody, John.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, back again, still very sleepy. My thought listening to you is A, to require appropriate insurance, and B, to have the right to inspect rather than putting the onus on the village to approve what somebody has, but have the right to inspect, and then you can see whether people are doing things properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I move that we keep the hearing open. Is there a second?
Is there any,
All those in
hold on a
favor?
second. Is there anybody else that would like to
No, I
say anything on this? Yeah, we keep it open. Anthony wants some.
Anthony. We've been coaxed to the front.
There we go.
Voice of
I'm
wisdom.
here, so I might as well say something, right? Anthony Vermandois, 68 Union Street. Yeah, just going on to section 11 here. I mean, I feel like some of this is, it's just a little bit too broad in terms of what the requirements are. I mean, there's something, there's basic life safety, there's smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, pool fences, things like that. Yeah, I mean, of course, and that those codes have not really changed very much in the 25 years, 30 years that I've been practicing architecture. I mean, you have to have a functioning smoke detector in your bedrooms and whatnot. But other things, you know, like sanitary codes, energy codes, they change like every 2 or 3 years. I mean, there are houses that I've done 5 years ago, and I can tell you they're not energy code compliant, and they're not septic system compliant, just because those codes just keep changing. So I think you have to, if there's going to be some kind of I think this has to really be narrowed down to just what are the real kind of life safety issues here, and not, you know, deal with, you know, how many leaching tanks there are in a backyard. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. I will tell you that in our house, in our family, we took the occasion of that tragedy to have a professional come in and reevaluate what turns out is a 40-year-old system.
Mhm.
And even though the gadgets had been changed, the technology is such now that particularly with carbon monoxide and other things that can be integrated, can be tied to essential warning, deal with burglary and other elements if you choose, everything else. So what was interesting to me is this is a well-known outfit out here, that they had seen almost a doubling of calls in the months right after Labor Day of people who have been influenced by this
Sure.
event. And so I learned that there are more efficient and more helpful devices that you can have in your house now. And the whole philosophy of how they'll be located and all that. So we want to continue to encourage all of that, but we've got to make this more enforceable and more practical in its impact.
We want to encourage compliance because ultimately we want people to raise awareness for safety and get these, make sure their smoke, their carbon monoxide in the pools are safe. Anybody who has a monitoring alarm company will actually reach out to you when they detect that one of your smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors are inoperative. You may not even know. And they all have a lifespan, and they need to be replaced after a certain amount of time. So anyhow, maybe
All right,
Tom,
thank
you
you.
and I could talk about this offline.
Yep.
And talk with you, Liz, and see what we can.
Okay,
do
but
together.
give us your notes. All right, all those in favor of extending the public hearing? Say aye, opposed. The matter is agreed to. Thank you. Next up is item number 2, and this is the clearing regulations with regard to land clearing, tree clearing. And this also is a public hearing that was opened last month, and I would invite a motion to reopen the hearing tonight.
I'll make the motion.
Tom, is there a second?
Second.
Ed, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
The hearing is open to local law establishing clearing regulations, chapter 300, section 300-9-11. I can tell you that there's been a strong interface with concerned citizens on this subject, one of whom has brightened our meeting with her smile. And we'll talk about it. But this has also been a project of trying to develop and confine and redefine and so forth. And for those who concern yourselves about how we do our work and our transparency, what you're seeing here tonight is basically what I would used to call my early training is markup time, where we're looking at proposals that have been introduced that are benefiting from public interface and our own interface here as elected officers. And this one has been back and forth now a few times. And so I would hear anyone who would like to be heard on the matter, which is the subject of this open hearing.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, of course, Ed.
I think much like the last law we just looked at, it's difficult to strike a balance whenever you're trying to draft legislation between the specific and the general. And you never anticipate every single thing. You never cover every issue. And I think in this instance, again, there's a balance that we still have to strike, and this doesn't quite strike it from my perspective between with the clearing percentages, which, as I've thought about it and talked to other people about it, can be met by clearing a lot of really valuable trees, old trees potentially, or an old tree, and replacing it with, frankly, much less valuable vegetation. So I think we have to continue to work through this. This is the hard work of drafting legislation, to figure out language to the extent possible that strikes the appropriate balance. And it's never going to be perfect, but I think there's still work to be done on this piece of legislation. To your point earlier, Jim, we all have to comment on this, try to really get down to the words on the page and figure out potential edits that might be better. So I encourage everybody to help with comments. Specific comments are even more helpful.
Thank you, Ed. Any other trustees?
A quick one.
Sorry, we'll be with you one second.
Sorry, I think at least in some of these situations, people don't know the law, or they don't read it in the code book, or they don't. I think we need to do a better job of communicating with the building permit itself, maybe in bigger letters, You can only do this and no more. And that's just, would be a way of communicating with particularly out of town developers. Take that, Mike.
Yes, sir, you're the first one here tonight, so welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the board. I've written this down.
We hear your name and where you
Yes,
live.
my name is Pat Tronzo. I'm an attorney. And I appear tonight on behalf of Marsden Street Properties LLC, the owner of 5 vacant residential building lots in the village. As those of you who were on this board in 2019 may recall, I appeared before you on November 12th of that year at a hearing on a proposed local law that was the first incarnation of the proposed regulations regarding clearing. After reviewing the proposed local law you are hearing tonight, I'm pleased to find that you listened to what I had to say and have followed most of the recommendations I urged upon you then. While this proposed law is much improved in its approach and scope, I hope you will listen to me once again and heed my criticisms, because the draft before you is beset with flaws that render it, in too many instances, vague, incoherent, and confusing. Thus, I'm here today to voice my opposition to the proposed amendment in its present form. Before delving into specifics, and I've tried to be very meticulous about telling you what specifics that I find problematic, I think it's appropriate to briefly present the legal standards for the enactment of sound zoning regulations. Rathkoff's The Law of Planning and Zoning, a well-recognized authority on land use zoning, in section 902, cites the well-settled rule that to be enforceable in an ordinance must be clear, precise, definite, and certain in its terms. This rule is ultimately based in the rulings of the highest court in the nation and our state. The Supreme Court has said that the right of fundamental fairness mandated under the Due Process Clause of the Federal Constitution, at a minimum, means that a citizen should not have to guess at what the law requires. It is a basic principle of due process that an enactment is void for vagueness if its prohibitions are not clearly defined. The Court of Appeals of New York has ruled that the same goes under the state constitution. Finally, I would add that these qualities in the law, clarity, precision, definiteness, and certainty, are vitally important, not only to the citizenry, but also to the persons charged with the enforcement of that law. Turning now to the organization and language of the law. The first section, 309.1a, adds definitions. This is good, but I wonder why these definitions are not instead added to section 302.2, the main definitions section of the zoning code. To me, as an attorney, the place to look for definitions is in the section entitled definitions. When they're in more than one place in a lengthy code and there are no cross references between sections, it's a distinct possibility that the second set of definitions will be missed. And inexplicably, one of the direct definitions to be added, natural vegetation, is already in section 302.2. And ironically, for the key definition of the word, meaning of the word clearing, the readers by this amendment actually referred to section 302.2. Why not keep it simple and familiar and put all the definitions in the one place the average reader knows to look for them? One of the new definitions strikes me as imprecise and unclear. It is defined as any action to change, interfere with, or otherwise destroy natural vegetation beyond reasonable management purposes. While it's good that the definition incorporates the term natural vegetation, so it is clear what the object of the prohibition is, it's entirely unclear what to make of the phrase beyond reasonable management purposes, because that term is not defined. Is this the same as reasonable management practices? Without more, both citizens and enforcement personnel will be forced to guess. Moving to subsection B, the word such before the term building code is changed to the letter A, since the preceding mention of the term is being struck out of this section. thus there's no antecedent of use of the term for the word such to properly refer to.
Mr. Treasurer, if I could, just for a second, I'm happy to hear this. And we will be happy to go to work on what you're offering. I'm wondering, we have a rule here, we never enforce about 3 or 4 minutes, but is that in a written form that
Yes,
you
it
can
is.
leave with us?
Of course.
Because we'll turn it over to council and share it with the trustees.
I-
But you're getting down to a level of editing, I think that we could probably accelerate here a little bit. The substantive points, I would want you to
Because
emphasize.
I put them in order of increasing importance.
Oh, okay, well.
So that was a minor nit, I think. Okay, turning next to subsection C, or is it B, because the B has not been struck out. It's here that I find a multitude of problems. In subsection 1, the term revegetation is suddenly and unexpectedly added after the word clearing. The term is not defined and it's entirely unclear why it is being introduced. In East Hampton and Southampton's enforcement of their clearing regulations, revegetation is an enforcement remedy to cure clearing in excess of what's allowed.
Can I interrupt you 1 second? Tell us, where are you? I was just trying to follow along. What page and what?
Okay, why don't I do this? Just so maybe some help.
Okay.
I'll give you the copies I prepared for the board.
Done it as a red line or just notes?
Well, I'm going in order of these things as they're presented in the proposed amendment. So you'll see I give you the section number I'm speaking to
Right,
in the proposed amendment. Remember enough copies there?
that works.
One more, please,
One more.
I think. Is that enough?
We have.
Send those,
We want one for Liz too.
Tom and I'll share.
For you. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody's good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because of the strike through and the numbering, it's a little confusing which page he's on.
Needs to be a little better proofreading.
I think it's on the bottom of page 2, top of page 3 of the version we have.
So top of page 3, starting the building permit application.
Okay, this is subsection C.
That's the next page.
I think the mayor had made a good point, that this may be too much editing for us to do.
Okay, I'm not asking you to perfectly understand my criticisms. I have written them out for you so you can compare to the draft that when it's more convenient.
This is good.
However, I would like to continue just so I can impress upon you why I think this law needs more work. Okay. So I'm pointing out that the introduction of the term vegetation, a term which is not defined, and it's confusing as to what's meant by the introduction of the term in this section. Is it used here in case an owner is voluntarily proposing to revegetation some portion of their lot? Or is it revegetation that is required as seemed to be the case with use of the term in subsection 5 below? Why would that be necessary, since further on in the same paragraph, mention is made to quote, the property's legally pre-existing clearing limits? This makes it sound like clearing taking place before the enactment of this amendment is grandfathered. However, maybe it's not. Hold on to that thought, because I'm going to come back to it in my comments on subsection 7. In subsection 3, a jurisdictional ambiguity is introduced. Review and approval of the building permit application is by the building inspector or Board of Historic Preservation and Architectural Review. Is this concurrent jurisdiction of some kind, or is it meant to encompass those applications that the building inspector refers to the BPR under subsection 2? Or is it meant to confer review and approval authority on the BPR when that board's approval is otherwise required, as in subsection 5? In subsection 6, there's another jurisdictional ambiguity as to the amendment seems to be conferring joint authority to approve subdivisions on the building inspector, in addition to the planning board. Somehow I don't think that's your legislative intent, but the plain language seems to inspect in part and for that authority. Also in subsection 6, why is the wordy unclear phrase, quote, for the minimum required lot area of the zoning district in which the tract lies employed on table 1 in subsection D could easily and be succinctly employed to wit as permitted in table 1 entitled lot clearing limits. I think that's what is intended here. In subsection 7, the reader can really get lost in the weeds. The context in which this subsection is clear, on lots when clearing is proposed on a lot which already contains pre-existing non-conforming clearing. Which clearing would presumably, but doesn't say this, exceed the limits specified in table 1. But the language of the subsection doesn't actually say that. It seems to say revegetation can be made a condition of the PPRs with the building inspector's approval. But what the heck is meant by demonstrating how the lot shall be revegetated to its pre-existing non-conforming condition? Since additional clearing is being permitted, how is the reversion to its prior pre-existing condition supposed to be accomplished? Logical inconsistency. Touch on just a couple more problems in the text. In subsection D3, it's not clear what quote rear yard requirement that's being referred to shall apply, and the term mature trees is employed. What is meant by mature? Trees of a certain age, trees of a certain height or caliber? There's no definition, and if it can't be objectively determined which trees are quote mature and which are not, how is the minimum percentage supposed to be reliably preserved? In subsection D6, the term mature trees is again employed, along with the term grand trees. What constitutes a grand tree is again not defined. Is a tree grand in the eyes of the beholder? And what's grand is going to vary from viewer to viewer depending on their experience. Anyone who's viewed the grand sequoias in California, or perhaps the historic oak in Savannah, Georgia, is likely not to find too many grand specimens amidst our native vegetation. The term naturalized vegetation is employed in this section, but yet, again, there's no definition. And lastly, on this section, to clarify and better effectuate what I think the legislative intent is, I would rewrite the introductory clause of this subsection as follows. Instead of saying calculating the percentage, say, in delineating the land areas proposed to be cleared, the natural vegetation on the lot should be prioritized for preservation to maintain areas of good quality native and naturalized vegetation. Finally, we come to subsection F. The section I can't help but think is especially aimed at the Marsden lots. To preface what I'm about to say, it's important to point out that a cartographical analysis of the Marsden lots done using a series of aerial photographs taken from 1954 to 1994 documents that 82% of the areas of the lots has been previously cleared. And since it starts in 1954, it reveals clearing, including that for the 2 19th century ice houses that had been taken place long before my parents came into ownership. So what vegetation is there now? And it's been surveyed by a horticulturalist and documented. Overwhelmingly, it is invasive species. This is particularly obvious on the northeastern lot, number 11, which is overrun with bamboo. There are dozens of others invasive species on the lots. Okay. The Nelson, Pope and Voorhees environmental planning study, which is the planning document undergirding this proposed legislation, astutely took account of the high potential for non-native invasive species to be present in varying quantities throughout the village, particularly in locations that have been disturbed and have opportunity invasive species present. This section of the report concludes by saying, given the presence of native, non-native, and invasive species, consideration should be taken with respect to the quality and type of vegetation to be preserved. There's virtually no indigenous natural vegetation to be found on the Marsden lots, and certainly none that is not second or third growth. as such is not present with the mix of trees found in undisturbed local woodlands with its associated understory. Given the reality on the ground, I'm honestly wondering what the point is of subjecting the Morrison lots to these proposed regulations. In the draft before you, I don't think the proposed legislations reflects your consultant's recognition of the invasive species phenomenon, nor does it show in its language any indication that Nelson, Pope, and Bory's sound advice that care should be taken in designating the quality and type of vegetation to be preserved. To do so, it is self-evident to me that the least invasive species need to be added as a defined term in the legislation, and the B part given guidance and expression to deal with it rationally and reasonably in any application that comes before them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You know, if this real estate thing doesn't work out, you can go back to teaching law and find some eager students. Very nicely done. Thank you very much. Sure.
You know, in the entirety of the United States, there's only one patch of virgin forest left. And oddly enough, it's in Brooklyn and the Bronx Botanical Garden. So after a certain amount of time goes by, 50, 70, 80 years, you're not going to find anything that's hasn't been disturbed in one way or another. I'd just like to point that out, that's the reality of the forest in the United States.
Most of the woodlands, the Northwest Woods, many other places in Southampton, East Hampton, were clear cut for firewood.
Yes.
You know, in the previous century.
That provision on F was not designated for your lots at all. It was actually taken from Southampton's code with respect to that regrowth, the regrowth.
You forgive me for my.
Yeah, even though you felt targeted. That's where it came from.
Understand my way.
Thank you, sir.
Those woodlands, they've come back to a condition that has a natural forest character and population. So I understand what you're saying. There are woodlands that have been preserved and rightly so. On my property, I don't think there's anything like that.
Thank you.
Again,
Thank you very
for your
much.
time.
Do we have, Cass, anybody?
Oh, there's a hand.
There's a hand up. There's a hand up.
I see. By just checking to see if we had anybody online. Come forward, please. Thank you.
Hi, you may be familiar with me at this point.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
How are you?
I won't go into the detail.
But do announce your name for everybody.
I won't go into that.
But
detail.
announce your name for everybody.
Oh, Eileen Rosenberg. I believe I sent you all this introduction, but for the benefit of people online, people here who might not know how we got here, I thought I would provide a little background and change it a little bit, but basically you have the information. About 7 years ago, a large swath of wooded land, 3 acres on Route 114 and Lighthouse Lane were completely denuded of trees virtually overnight. It shocked and woke up the village, resulting in a petition of several hundred signatures in support of clearing regulations. So here we are, many years later, over 3 administrations, finally at the point of making a significant change to the code to mitigate the destruction of our natural environment. Residents of Sag Harbor have rightly been concerned about the changing nature of the village. Focus has been on preserving the essence of Sag Harbor by curbing rampant and oversized development through GFA limitations. And this has been and should continue to be a priority. However, the legislation that protects the trees, the landscape, the natural setting, an essential part of the village's beauty, its attraction and environmental health has been sorely missing. 10 years ago, I think developers and owners really did not regularly clear properties. I think that has become the norm these days. So with increased building has come the devastation of the natural landscape, trees and understory indiscriminately removed, resulting in what has progressively looked more like a controlled suburban environment. The importance of trees, I think, has been evident. I don't think there's a day that goes by where you don't read something about the importance of trees, but their importance cannot be overstated. Significantly improving air quality, preventing erosion and stormwater runoff, providing wildlife habitats, providing cooling of the air, providing noise abatement and natural privacy buffers, and basically are essential for not only the visual enjoyment of our properties, but physical and even psychological enjoyment. So on behalf of the village, the Landscape Preservation Committee, which is really Jane and I, developed this legislation that hopefully meets the moment by balancing the needs of the residents with the environmental impact of overdevelopment. We try to create a code that does not overreach or overstep, so that residents have flexibility to create a pleasing environment for themselves while still being sensitive to their neighbors, the village at large, and the health of our environment. So we're trying to achieve this with this legislation, but we do feel that it requires some additional provisions, and we made some suggestions accordingly to make it a little bit more effective. 5 recommendations that we provided, we hope will give a little bit more backbone teeth to the legislation, and they include: 1, adding a buffer column to the lot clearance table, because side and rear buffers are essential in providing privacy and noise abatement. 2, adding a provision that clearing percentages need to be maintained and that any future changes require resubmission of new plans. 3, providing definitions and provisions for mature and specimen trees, which not only add to the historic nature of the village, but literally they're irreplaceable. Current penalties for lack of compliance seems insufficient to prevent clear cutting and maintaining the desired percentage of lot coverage. So we had suggested referring to North Haven's proposed protections, which include higher financial penalties for violations. And finally, attaching to the legislation something that we already have, which is the Sag Harbor Native Plant Guide, which contains a list of approved tree and shrub species for revegetation. Along with that, some language that discourages the use of certain species used as a hedge so as to avoid further suburbanization. So we strongly recommend these additions be included in the legislation to strengthen its impact and fully achieve its stated goals, and we hope and trust that they will be included in the final version. I did supply you with some photos. I have many, many more, but those are the ones we had. We do believe that if we pass this legislation now, we'll be thankful we had the foresight to enact it, joining many other communities who have already committed to preserving the natural environment. So on behalf of this huge committee, Jane and I, we thank you for your time and consideration. We'd also like to acknowledge the tremendous work done by Kathy Eisman of Nelson Pope and Voorhees, former village attorney Julie Schoen, and of course current village attorney Liz Vale in helping draft this legislation. We'd also like to thank Mayor Baraka again for finally bringing this much needed legislation to the community for their consideration. So thank you all very much for your time. And Jane and I are here if anyone has any comments, we would like to address any questions. We do understand where Mr. Tronzo is coming from in terms of fine tuning this, but we think it's a good start.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I come to this conversation as I have to the previous, which is this is a work in progress. And we've had a very thoughtful, detailed critique of our work so far. But we have appreciated all of that. And I'm going to move here in a moment that we go ahead and keep this hearing open going forward. But I see Anthony, do you want to be heard? Come forward. She didn't want to.
68 Union Street. Just want to reiterate my initial support for this law. As I mentioned when it was first brought up, I think it's pretty, generally speaking, pretty well thought through, although I do agree with Mr. Trunzo's comments about some of the definitions needing to be tightened up a bit. What I like about this is that even though the actual percentages are pretty aggressive, especially for large properties, it does allow for a little bit of case by case flexibility and discretion on part of the building inspector and the architectural review board, which is absolutely crucial in Sag Harbor, because as we all know, every property in the village is different and unique. So kind of a cookie cutter thing isn't going to work for every property, but this really addresses that, I think, with, just maybe as we said, some tightening up. One thing I do feel compelled to add, since everybody's talking about Marsden Street tonight, I mean, whether or not Marsden Street is all virgin growth forest or all bamboo, it's kind of a moot point if the school district purchases the property, because it will be exempt from this code and every other code. So, but that's nothing you or I can do about that.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, I can't quite see you. Oh, there you go. Yes, sir.
Terrence Nugent, full disclosure, I live south. I have to live opposite two properties that were clear cut. Beautiful wooded properties that find a neighborhood. It's also 2 blocks away from Lighthouse Landing. I can tell you that the change in noise level has been substantial. I literally traffic from 114 before, and now it's a constant hum. Unfortunately, what was a 3+ acre pine forest is now a housing development that looks very much like a suburban community with manicured lawns. Having a home in Sag Harbor for 36 years, I can say that in my opinion, these changes have not been for the better. I encourage the passage of the legislation to preserve what is left of what I love of this village.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Jane,
I'm done here.
we're unmuting you. Speak. Nope, still don't have it.
Maybe she.
There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's fine.
I just, I just.
Jane Young.
Yes, Jane Young, co-worker with Eileen on this project for 7 to 8 years. And a resident of Noyak, but a very engaged citizen in Sag Harbor for 15 years. It's my village. I just wanted to say, I mean, what Eileen said summarized everything, but one of the elephants in the room, so to speak, is about property rights and telling people what they can or can't do. And my point on this is the village is compact. There are neighbors cheek by jowl, and the neighbors who are adjacent to the people who are clear cutting or suburbanizing their properties, those people must have rights too. So I think the way to attain balance with this is to come forward with a law that recognizes not only the property owners and putting some limitations on what can be done, but bearing in mind that we are protecting all of the neighbors from an environment. They buy a house and property and it looks a certain way, and then all of a sudden it's completely different. And they've lost privacy, they've lost peaceful enjoyment in a lot of cases, they've lost visual enjoyment. So I just want to present that other side to this argument, because I don't think it gets considered enough. There are a lot of victims with this, and Eileen gets phone calls, I get phone calls. And we really hope that you will. I really feel that we can do this. Many legislative areas have done these kinds of laws. We're not in any way an outlier on this. So I think we can step up and do it this time, and we're happy to help. We're happy to be supportive. But if at the end of the day, it's going to be resting on your shoulders. And, I hope we can do it this time.
Well, thank you, Jane, for that. Thank you for your good work. Anyone else to be heard? All right, thank you very much. I would make the motion to continue the public hearing on this with a similar charge. Thank you, Anthony. Of our own notes and feed in. This markup should continue. It's challenging. It's a challenging balancing act here. I would add to our general orientation here. It doesn't fit in the writing, but when we struggle with the broader question of affordability where we live, putting aside the question of affordable housing projects, I am mindful of the enormous difficulty young families, people starting out, young working people have in being able to afford to live here. And I want to be careful as we do this that we don't load in valuable and worthy requirements that somehow drive price a little too much. So I think we want to, at least one of our reads of this should be with a view to, are there any, unintended consequences in that area? So I've made the motion. Is there a second to keep that open?
I'll second.
Aiden? Any other comments? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Thank you very much. And that concludes our
We have one more.
number 3, includes number 2. And this is the undertaking also begun last month to come back to the overlay code, which we enacted last year, to clarify a couple of elements where questions have arisen as time has gone on. And so I would hear a motion to reopen that public hearing from last month on item number 8, number 3.
I'm sorry, Jim, we're just opening the public hearing tonight for the first time on all 3
There's
local
notice.
laws. Yeah, we just introduced last month, so this is all just a new public hearing opening.
So to open the public hearing tonight,
I'll make a motion.
is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I'd just like to comment that the planning board chair, John Shaka, and Ron Reed have requested more time for this so they can look at it and review it.
Right, and I think we've all heard that.
Certainly doesn't preclude comments, but
Yeah, well, that's the subject of this opening. Liz, do you want to make a quick comment on content here?
Sure. So this is a local law to amend the waterfront overlay district standards, section 315.3 and 311.2310. Specifically, it seeks to expand the definition of a waterfront lot in the waterfront overlay district to include a lot that abuts an easement, private road, private access way, right of way, or flag to another property that abuts a water body or abuts a park that abuts a water body, which is just expanding the definition to include those as shown in the diagram that was provided by Nelson Pope and Voorhees. And then the other section seeks to limit the permitted height of structures on waterfront lots in the waterfront overlay district to 25 feet. It's eliminating the code provision where 3rd stories were permitted with a maximum height of 35 feet on waterfront lots in the village business zoning district, as long as pursuant to 300-11.23 D10. And that was the section that allowed for, and it eliminates this as well, allows for the village business waterfront lots in the waterfront overlay district where appropriate. The village board of trustees have the right to increase the height to 3 stories or 35 feet, conditioned upon the applicant providing the construction of a permanent accessible pedestrian walkway and a minimum of 10 feet in width for public use, providing public access to the waterfront. So that's eliminating that, and it's actually requiring that structures for waterfront lots in the village business zoning district within the waterfront overlay district be 25 feet in height, and that's it. And I think the planning board wants to be heard, and the harbor committee as well would like an adjournment of this hearing to be heard as well.
Right. Trustees?
No, I think it's I think the redefinition is good, and I like the idea of reducing the, keeping the sky plane open. But I'd love to hear what the planning board has to say in the harbor committee.
Right, certainly the committees will be heard. And I think I'd like to invite the community to view this as further strengthening the protections that were built into the overlay code to protect the waterfront sky plane, which is bedrock to the LWRP, is specifically protected by this action. And the addressing of what constitutes waterfront lot is really a matter of clarification that was basically tightening up those definitions. So we're happy to hear from questions, comments, and hearing none.
We like it.
Yep. Okay, we like that. I noticed Cassie, is this? I'm waving to you as hello. Did you want to be heard?
She probably doesn't even know we're addressing her.
Yeah.
That's a no.
Okay. She knows.
She knows, all right.
Okay, so we then hear a motion to keep the hearing open going forward, and we will come back to it next month. And similarly, if there are comments, I know we have a letter from the planning board making this request, in which we are endorsing and acting on. And I would say to both boards that have been heard so far, if you want to provide additional commentary and detail, we'd be happy to receive it. So is there a motion to continue the hearing?
I'll move it.
Second. And hey, Bob, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. The hearing is continued. Next up, action items. Section number 11.1, authorization for the mayor to sign an agreement with Harbor Tours to operate the sightseeing cruises on the American Beauty from Long Wharf for the 2023 boating season. I meant to ask today what number season this is. They've been here as long as I've been on the waterfront.
Since I was a child.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
It's a terrific asset on the waterfront.
Oh, yeah.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion is agreed to. Commander Stafford of the American Legion requests permission to have the annual Memorial Day Parade through the village, ending at Marine Park on Monday, May 29th, which is the official observation of Memorial Day, along with a sign on Long Wharf. Is there a motion?
I'll
Is there a
second.
second?
I'll
All
second.
those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Number 3, Cheryl Newbauer of the Massapequa Park Bike Club requests permission to ride through the village for their tour of the Hamptons on Sunday, October 1st, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And will end at the Southampton High School. Ms. Newbauer also requests to sign signage on the route.
I'll just ask, I have a question. Does the chief know about this, Kate? Or is it-
Correct.
And he was okay with it?
Yep.
So then I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Next up, authorization to refund the following small claims adjustments from 2021, Vincent Charbol for $108.20, Julie Silcox and Michael McQuaid, $135.52. From 2022, Morris Dickstein, $228.35.
So moved.
Is there a motion for
Second.
both? Second, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
The refunds are agreed to. Katie Plum, who is here in person, requests permission to have the annual farmers market beginning on Saturday morning, starting May 27th, 2023 through October 28th, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. What year is this of this, the market?
20, that was started in 2001, actually,
So 21 years,
22.
22 years.
22 years. Excellent. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion is agreed to. Thank you, and thank you, Kate. Item number 6, resolution to authorize the mayor to sign agreement with Captain Tom Federico to operate half and full day Surfmaster sport fishing charters from Long Wharf, actually in the transient dock area, Also a return of a long time a charterer. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Thank you. Number 7, authorization to accept 2023 bank reconciliations and collateral reports. I don't see any mention of Signature or Silicon Bank.
I asked about.
I'm
I
happy to
asked about
observe.
those.
West Coast is the West Coast. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Number 8, authorizing extension of computer shared capability agreement with Southampton Town. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Number 9, authorization for D&D engineers and architects to prepare the 2023 annual report for the Stormwater Management Program. Aiden, you want to make that motion?
I will. I'll make that
Okay.
motion.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second?
I'll
All
second.
those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Number 10, Chief McGuire requests authorization to advertise for traffic control officers, as we mentioned before. And the target is perhaps as many as 10 or 11.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
And for all the matters we talked about earlier. And add to that mix one potential new part-time position for a part-time officer. Tom has made the motion. Is there a second?
I made the second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
I agree to. Number 11, acceptance of 2024 grievance adjustments recommended by the town. This is out of the process we conducted a few weeks ago. One of the appeals was approved, that is for Dan Marcelli of Redwood, and 2 were denied. Move the acceptance
I'm
of
sorry, the
those
rest were
adjustments.
denied. All of the other ones were denied.
All of the other ones.
Yes.
Is there a motion to accept the adjustments? To authorize the adjustments? The adjustment. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Resolution accepting with regret, the resignation of Charles Broadmeadow, who has given us good service at the sewage treatment plant. And we wish him well and we thank him for his service.
We do indeed. We will miss him and we're working hard to replace him. It's a small crew down there and it's becoming an issue. So I will regretfully make that motion.
And
I'll second.
we're going to place an ad, I think. It's a
Yeah.
separate item.
Yeah.
And we have Charles until April 27th.
So,
So we
yeah.
do have
This
some
year
time
through
frame
the
with
end,
them.
through the end of April. So motion to accept with regret.
Aiden, I seconded
You
it.
already did, all right. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. A resolution, March 23, authorization to advertise for the proposal for our annual launch services. I'll make this motion, Bob, and you'll notice that the chief and the harbor master and the deputy harbor master all went out on a fire call a little while ago. So I'll put this motion forward. Ken Deeg has given us good and valuable service now for many years. The launch service is steadily enlarged as the activity in the waterfront is enlarged. So I would move an advertisement for this launch service this year. It is the service that in the past had been provided by Ken.
What happened with Ken?
You just have to do it annually.
Yes,
You have to advertise
yes, to
annual.
compete
You have
for
to
this.
open it
All
to
right.
everyone.
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Number 14, authorizing the mayor to sign an IMA, intermunicipal agreement with the Incorporated Village of East Hampton for police department dispatching services. I think the headline here is this is a 5-year deal.
Okay,
Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I think we're satisfied that the efficiencies here now argue for doing it on the longer.
Yes.
It is, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Number 15, authorizing the mayor to sign the harbor master agreement with the Village of North Haven. If you remember, toward the end of last season, we began to extend our outings a little bit with our marine patrols to cover the west side of North Haven at their request. and the details of that have been worked out. And this authorizes me to sign the agreement for this season.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Number 16, authorizing the purchase of the fireboat.
How exciting.
I'll make that
Tom,
motion.
you wouldn't want to make that.
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
And I would also like to thank the community for continuing to support this purchase. I think we've raised, I mean, close to $260,000 so far, and it's still, the effort's still out there, so.
I'll second, I was seconded already.
Right.
Yeah.
for it, you got it.
You can double second it. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. Thank you. Number 17, this is to opt out or opt in rather to the Town of Southampton Community Housing Fund Opportunities. And there's a collateral motion to do the same thing in East Hampton. This is to put us in position under the recently passed expansion of the CPF to have a housing element to it, community housing element. And this puts us in the first stage of being part of that process.
Also, by the way, Mayor, starting in, I believe, April of this year, the transactions will start to accumulate that 0.5%.
All right.
So we will start to see funds going into that starting
Right, and
in April.
And I think they'll build, they're not going to build at the rate we've seen in recent years, but they will build nicely, I would say.
So I'll make the motion.
On both,
On
on
both,
both
on
17
both,
and
yeah.
18. Is there a second on both?
second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matters are agreed to. Number 19, Richard Scavone, the Fire Department Secretary, requests to accept the resignation of Ben Sweezy, who has moved out of town in good standing, and to remove him from the insurance rolls. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a
Second.
second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Matter is agreed to. Number 20, another Scavone, Richard Scavone again, Secretary requests to accept the following I guess we accept the following appointments or
Yes,
resignation.
no, appointments
Yes.
Howie Klein Smith IV as the
Yeah.
Assistant Captain of Phoenix Hook and Ladder.
Right.
And Nick Maggio will again, who was once a warden, will become warden of the Phoenix Hook and Ladder. So Howie is going to become a line officer for his company. And Nick is now taking his position as warden. And this is going to become a common theme in the firehouse because we're at the point now where we have so few newer members that the members that are there, they're being recycled into these positions. So you know,
Right.
this is where we're going.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is we are ratifying or accepting those
Right.
appointments.
I'll
Right,
make the motion.
okay, and thank you for that explanation. Second,
Second.
all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Matter is approved. Number 21, Richard Scavone, Secretary, on behalf of the Board of Wardens, requests to keep fire truck number 7-1-1 and use it in the antique truck. This is the matter
Right.
Deputy Mayor raised
Yes.
earlier.
I'll
And this
move.
will,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Just-
So moved.
yeah.
Thank you. Ray.
It'll go to our antique facility. It's
Yes.
The ultimate idea. Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Matter is agreed to. Number 22, Chief of Police requests to advertise for the position of lifeguards and beach attendant for the 2023 season. We do this, hopefully, these have been tough jobs to fill.
Yeah, we have there's a question about both these positions. The lifeguard position is, I believe, right now we have, there's a total of 9 kids that are taking what's called the still
Lifesaver.
water class,
Yeah.
right? And then inevitably they take the ocean class.
Mhm.
And what's happening is these young people, adults, are then, we're asking for somebody 16 or older to be there. Get jobs making $20 or $30 an hour at the beach clubs.
Right.
So there's heavy competition out there for lifeguards.
Yeah.
And then there, as far as the beach attendants go, we discussed this with the chief this afternoon. We might possibly want to look at,
I meant to bring that up.
okay, expanding, instead of having beach attendants there, if you have a village sticker, you don't get charged for parking. But maybe move the mobile app system down there.
Right, that we can create another,
Right.
another.
So that, we have to
geofence.
discuss that.
Yeah.
But
I
it's something to
discussed that
think
with
about,
the chief
rather,
as well.
right.
It's on my mind, and that would relieve us of trying to find attendance down there.
Attendance,
And
it
it would
would,
make no change. Anybody who had a beach sticker would just drive in and park as normal, and then anybody who was visiting would participate in the parking.
I was also told that we have adequate Wi-Fi service
There
down
is,
there
yeah.
to handle,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, that's
something
easy to
think
do.
about.
We just
Yeah.
need to make a
Resolution for
a
that.
resolution. for that
The
next
chief
month.
routes cars through there, through the day.
Yeah.
To locate out the place.
So maybe we should strike the beach attendant part of this, or should we?
Well, let's see what's out there.
We don't have to hire
That's been.
All right,
that's
so
been-
we'll-
We can advertise. It's actually, we didn't receive really many last year,
Yeah.
so we can try
Alright.
again to see what comes in.
So then I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the matter is agreed to. And this is boat night here at the Village Hall, because the next item is to authorize the purchase of a harbor master boat for the proposal that was advanced. I will make that motion on behalf of the harbor master. And this is the upgrade of our tried and true old tub that we're using now. And I make the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, matter is agreed to. Number 24, authorizing the mayor to sign a proposal for engineering services with Cameron Engineering and Associates for drainage at Marsden Street. This is some anticipatory work that we would be doing in any event. And with the activity, the tension going on over there, we're going to bring in the engineers to have a look. Ed, did you want to add to that?
This actually started when, early on in the negotiations with the school in the village, where the school in the town, where the town had agreed to use CPF funds for Marsden. We spoke to the school and asked them to include our engineers in the analysis of the stormwater work to be done there. The school at that time agreed to include it in the project costs of the work to be done for Marsden and the stormwater and whatever they agreed to with the town. Of course, the circumstances have changed there somewhat or evolving. We still, and so Cameron Engineer did some of the work already. The village employees have pulled together the work that was done for stormwater there before. Cameron has reviewed it, compiled it, shared it with, at that time, the engineers for the school district. They've had a couple of meetings about it, about potential resolutions to that, depending on what the school and the town do at that site. Cameron is at least brought up to speed now on the issues there, the work that's been done in the past. And they could be the village's eyes and ears to make sure that whatever the town and the school or anybody else agrees to at that property, stormwater is properly accounted for and dealt with.
Yeah, from the beginning.
Hopefully too, that if the school and or goes forward with the town, that these costs could still be rolled into the project costs.
Yeah, and I would feel very strongly in this chair that while we'll do this early and in support of whatever activity and whatever it leads to, that any reimbursement would be well received by the village.
I'll make the motion.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
The matter is agreed to. Next up, number 25, authorizing the mayor to sign an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Southampton for fire marshal services. This is for backup when our fire marshal may be on vacation or unavailable for one reason or another. And it's on a per event cost basis or as needed basis.
I'll make
So
the
it's
motion.
Basically
Yep.
backup.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Authorization for DR, number 26, authorization for D Yardley to advertise for the sewer plant laborer and or sewer plant operator position. This is for the vacancy created by Mr. Broadmeadow. And we're going to post this in such a manner that it could post to two lists. Sewer plant operator or sewer plant laborer and sewer plant operator. We don't mean both, we mean either or, because we can pull from either list, but we have to work the list. So
You make the motion.
motion,
I'll
is there a
second.
second? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Matter is agreed to. Thank you. Okay, item 12, the approval of payment of bills in warrant. But here a motion on bond to hear warrant number 41, 42, 43, 44, and 5 in the amounts described. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our formal agenda. We are in a second public comment series, period. Is there anyone else to make a public, yes, ma'am, come up forward?
Madison Street. We all want as much transparency as possible about Mars and maps. Could you just give us a little bit more information on what you said concerning Cameron Engineering? Have they already been engaged? Are they already doing this study? Because the Board of Education indicated that they had already done this study.
I wouldn't call it they've analyzed the information in the village records about stormwater work that had been done there back in the 1990s. They've walked the properties, they've done site visits, and they've also had at least 2 meetings with the engineers for the school district. No study has been done at this point that I'm aware of. And their role is not to do a study. Their role is to make sure that whatever happens with the property, that the stormwater engineering work is properly done to the satisfaction of the village as well.
And their report will be released to people beyond the Board of Education?
They're not doing a study.
Okay. All right, well, whatever
They're advising, consulting. Their role is to advise, consult, and engage with whoever is doing the work there to make sure that the village needs are met.
Yeah.
And in the preliminary negotiations with the school said that they would certainly, as part of taking over the property, work with Cameron Engineering to make sure the stormwater is taken care of. That negotiation is now in flux. So whatever the disposition of the property is, Cameron is now up to speed on the stormwater to engage with whoever the eventual property owner is.
Basically trolled through all the village records. We came up with some drawings, engineering drawings for the dry wells that were put in. We gave Cameron everything. They're basically looking after the village interest in all of this, and it was in our best interest that they were up to speed and at least knew what was going on, so they can report back to us and they can interface with the engineers of the school. We have no idea what's going to develop. I mean, you were there, but we think it's important that our engineers of record were involved in this from the get-go to protect our interests.
So I'm not going to call it a study.
No, there is no study.
But let's call it a report or whatever. Is that going to be public?
They're not publishing anything. They're
commenting. I
Yes,
guess.
they're assessing the situations. Another engineering firm theoretically will be doing a report. And Cameron will weigh in on it. They'll advise leading into the report, they'll weigh in, but they're not responsible for preparing reports.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Anyone else on any subject? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public comment period and thank everybody for their participation tonight. I would hear a motion to adjourn the regular meeting.
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And have a good evening.